From his studios in New York, it's time for Wake Up Call with Dan Tortora, where sports meets life. Here's your host, Dan Tortora.
Welcome back here to Wake Up Call with Dan Tortora on wakeupcalldt.com, your one-stop sports shop, and on mixlr.com/wakeupcalldt. Proud to be here with you this morning and every Monday through Friday from 9 a.m. to 11 a.m. Eastern Time live anywhere in the world. And I want to thank everybody that has tuned in to the show, obviously here on the Northeast side and up and down the East Coast, the Midwest, the West Coast, and outside of the country as well. We appreciate you tuning in, and we definitely appreciate Spain and Denmark. We want to give them a shout. I think Denmark, first time ever this past Monday, so thank you for tuning in to the broadcast, and very happy that we can reach so many different people in different places and nooks and crannies of the world. So with that being said, speaking of something that reaches kind of over a vast region, the American Athletic Conference has the ability to reach people from different places and have so many different coaches coming into it, different systems. And when we look at different sports and whatnot, finding success across the board is obviously something that the American Athletic has worked to hang its hat on. And it's always a pleasure, an honor, and a privilege to have their commissioner on the show. His name is Mike Aresco, and he is here with us this morning of the American Athletic. Mike, how are we doing today?
Good morning, Dan. Great to be with you. Thank you.
And I mean, I know you said off the air it's been a little while, so what have you been up to? What's life for the commissioner in these first few months? I want to call it spring, but I know that I can't yet. So what has life been like for you?
I agree. It hasn't really been spring here, although we did have one beautiful day a few days ago, but that's been about it. And as you know, it often happens that way. Spring doesn't happen, and then suddenly summer's here. But the last several months, really going back even further than that, have been devoted to TV. It's been TV media all 24/7, because we had to get our TV deal done, and it was critical to the future of the conference. And fortunately, we did get it done, and we got what I consider a phenomenal agreement with ESPN that will assure the financial stability of the group and continue allow them to continue to grow. So that was really our focus, and it was a complex deal because, as you know, the media landscape is not what it once was. There are a lot of options, a lot of platforms. At ESPN, we're happy to be with them. It's a one-stop shop, although we will have another deal likely with CBS for a handful of network basketball games. We, as you know, Army-Navy, that's a separate deal with CBS, with Navy, and also Navy has a regular season deal with CBS, which is part of our conference's, accumulation of rights. So we have a little more, but our main deal is with, of course, ESPN, and we're happy about that. But it was complex to figure it out, and we can talk today a little bit. There have been some misconceptions about that deal, but that's really the last 6 to 9 months, Dan. And I don't know when we last talked, but it's been, we've been absorbed in that, and now we've got to, mop it up and look to the future.
And so let's speak on that. You said, that there are some misconceptions about the new TV deal that's supposed to be carrying you through the 2031, 2032 seasons. Just what you could say about, what are the misconceptions that have kind of come up to your desk, and what is the reality of it all?
Yeah, the biggest one, and although we're pleased to have a good presence on ESPN Plus, and I think you saw recently that the Big 12 is going to have a significant presence on Plus, which I think affirmed the decision we made. It's almost, as I said earlier when we did our deal, it's almost like having your own branded network. But the misconception is that somehow most all of our games are going to ESPN Plus, that we've become essentially an ESPN Plus conference, and that's just not true. As a matter of fact, we are going to be getting more games, and I stress this, more games on ESPN's primary linear networks than we had before. We are going to get more football games on the main networks, ABC, ESPN, ESPN2, ESPNU, than we had before. We are going to get more men's basketball games on ESPN ESPN, ESPN2, ESPNU that we had before. ABC doesn't really do college basketball. And we are going to get more women's basketball. UConn women's basketball could be on ESPN more than some major men's programs. So what we've done, we've taken a lot of events that were essentially hardly televised at all, or on obscure websites that people really didn't have access to, or they did have access to them, but they didn't necessarily ever watch them, or they had to pay a larger fee than frankly what ESPN Plus charges in order to get perhaps a campus website presentation. So we're going to now have, for example, well over 150 women's basketball games that will be on ESPN Plus. So for $4.99 a month, and again, I'm not hawking for ESPN, but this is really important to note. For $4.99 a month, you'll be able to get a countless number of men's and women's basketball games, many of which, again, were televised either on ESPN3 or other websites, and some of the men's games were elsewhere. And you're also going to be able to get all sorts of Olympic sports that you probably that either were really not televised or were televised on websites, or sometimes on the American Digital Network, which will now be transferred to ESPN Plus. So there's going to be a one-stop shop. You're going to be able to program it and determine what you want to watch, when you want. If there's a game on a particular time, you can set your iPhone or your laptop or whatever you want to do to tell you when that's going to be on. There's going to be a lot of features to this. So this is a net plus for fans. You're going to be able to see more sports, and you're still going to see our main games. We're still going to have those ABC games and football that we've had. We're still going to have all that great coverage. And that's one major, I think, misconception, the notion that we've become strictly an ESPN Plus conference and that all our games are going behind a paywall. And I think that's very important to clarify.
And when you look at this, just to speak on, just what you'll be getting for your media rights, money-wise, and then kind of divvying that up amongst the teams in the conference, because I know that there's going to be a substantial increase to that. So just what you can say about that.
Well, yeah, we typically, equalize our revenue, and we try to, do things on an equal basis. There will be more revenue. There will be, some things we'll have to figure out. There's some nuances here and there. But, last time around, we had different pools of revenue. We had revenue coming from the old Big East in units left behind and exit fees. And that had to be divided up equitably. But equitably doesn't necessarily mean equally, because some teams were in that league and others weren't, and some contributed to that revenue and others didn't. In this case, everybody's contributed to this, and I think ultimately where it will come down is everyone will share equally with perhaps some nuances. We have a few incentives in place. But, one thing I would also add to the discussion about the coverage, the exposure, the distribution, is that we did have some games, a sub-license with CBS Sports Network, which is available in roughly half the country. And I don't know whether ESPN will continue that. They may well not. We just don't know. In addition, SNY, the Sportsnet New York carries the Mets in New York. They branch out regionally, and they've done, a number of UConn women's basketball games, and ESPN may or may not do a deal with them. Other games, obviously, were on ESPN3, and a number of those games from those three platforms will likely gravitate to ESPN Plus. But again, those are not games that were on our main networks. And that's the key. We're now getting more coverage on the main networks where most people watch their football and basketball. ESPN, ABC, ESPN2, ESPNU. And we've got a significantly expanded presence on ESPNU. There's some windows open now because, as you know, there's product flowing to the ACC network, to the SEC network. Obviously ESPN doesn't have the entire Big Ten. So we fill, an important niche, and it's not even a niche, really. We're a major part of ESPN's programming, calendar. And I think I think this deal is terrific for the conference because, we got the revenue we needed. Yes, it's a long-term deal, but there's always an opportunity down the road to relook at it or to do some things. And if we continue to do well, ESPN will probably look hard at what they want to do, in the future in terms of, extending. If we do well, I'm confident that would happen. The main thing, Dan, is that we elevated ourselves enormously. We separated ourselves, we elevated ourselves. We're much more like the P6. The Pac-12 doesn't get anywhere near the money the Big Ten or the SEC does, but they're still a P5, aren't they? Yes. Well, we don't get as much money as the Big 12 or the Pac-12, but we're edging closer. And the next time around, obviously, we'll be looking to finally get into that range if we can continue to build this. And I think this now gives us enough revenue and enough exposure to continue to do it. We've got hungry schools that are anxious to compete, and I think this gives them the platform to do it.
And when we look at this, speaking here with American Athletic Conference Commissioner Mike Aresco this morning on Wake Up Call with Dan Tortora, to look at the numbers here, what I'm seeing, and I want to make sure that we get them correct here, that's the American Athletic Conference getting $1 billion for its media rights from ESPN over 12 years, the average of $83.3 million per year, looking at 4 times what the American Athletic Conference had in its previous rights agreement with the Nets, which paid the league over $20 million annually. The annual per-school average of $6.94 million provides each AAC school with nearly $5 million more in annual revenue. Are these accurate numbers? Is it better? I mean, what can you say about those numbers?
Yeah, Dan, we don't discuss the numbers publicly, but everybody knows what they are. And, the numbers have been reported, and I really should leave it at that, because Burke and I, when we were on the conference call, both acknowledge the leaks and all the things that were out there, but we don't actually affirm or, deny numbers. We don't really get into the numbers themselves. I mean, I wouldn't say to you, yes, Dan, that's the right number or something like that. So I just want to leave it at that. But obviously, this is, it's been widely reported what the deal is, and it's a significant deal. It is a game changer for us. It's quite significant, and again, that's probably where I should stop. But again, it will provide this financial security for the schools that they needed.
And for you, though, I mean, so not to go into the specific numbers, but the increase, just the importance of that, because you and I have spoken about, trying to bring more money into the conference to substantiate the work that you're trying to do, to obviously keep the member schools happy, and to show the growth, show them that you're making the effort, show that the American Athletic Conference wants these schools to have the money that they need and to be able to advance and progress. Do you feel like you're getting there, from the conversations we've had in the past to what this is, without saying, obviously the exact numbers, and I respect that totally, to feel like you're more on the footing of where you were maybe venturing to go?
Oh, I don't think there's any question. And I think if you had said, or others had speculated a few years ago, especially 6 years ago, that we would do a deal of this magnitude, and what the reports are, people would have said, no way. There's no chance that could happen. But you saw the growth. You saw what we've done as a conference. The one thing, in terms of the way we approach this negotiation, and ESPN was terrific, and they cooperated with us, and I think they accepted this notion. And the notion was that, look, we can't start from this $20 million business, because that was nothing more than a function of our complete disarray 6 years ago. We were essentially like a bankruptcy reorganization. You remember those days. We didn't even know who was going to be in the conference. We had guys coming and going. It was a very depressing time, but we quickly worked our way out of it. We had to rebrand with a new name, a new logo. We were the true startup, and we lost the Garden. We lost a good many of our bowl games. We had to start from scratch. We had to get a new site for a men's basketball tournament, all sorts of things that had to be done. But we sat down and we worked it out, and I knew we had a group of good schools. So when we kept building this thing, and suddenly we're a thriving conference. We're like a company that may have been taken out of bankruptcy, but now has an incredible product line and is thriving. Well, when we looked at this, we said, we don't want to work off that 20 million and say, wow, we'd be thrilled with getting 40 million. We'd be thrilled with doubling our rights fee. We didn't want to approach it that way. We felt that, look, we have a certain value, and we've really got to get that value. And ultimately, I'm happy that, we worked out something with ESPN. They've been a great partner. They built our brand with us. They were terrific during this negotiation. I can't say enough good things about Jimmy Pitaro and his support for this, and he was directly involved, although Burke Magnus was the point person, and Burke was just absolutely terrific. He supported us. He felt we had real value. He felt we had great potential. We kept stressing also, look what we've achieved, but look what we can still achieve. And if you look at the games we'll have in the first week of the college football season, kind of indicates what we are. We'll have UCLA at Cincinnati, which probably will be a Thursday night game. I think we may have a Friday night game we have one with Wisconsin at USF. I think that may be Friday. I think Saturday there may even be an ABC game, Ole Miss at Memphis, and then now it's been announced that the Houston at Oklahoma game with Daniel Holgerson and Derek King and Jalen Hurts will be on Sunday night on ABC, the lone game that day. That's the huge platform. Think about what that represents, for this conference, the very first week of the football season. And that's going to be typical in years going forward, because it's probably not really widely known or understood, but we have over 150 games home and away against P5 teams in that 10-year span going from next year on. And that's really significant. And a lot of great names in that group, whether it's Oklahoma, whether it's Notre Dame, whether it's Penn State, whether it's Texas, whether it's others, Auburn. Great names all along, UCLA, Stanford. I could go on and on, Big Ten teams. The point is, this league belongs with the other five. We've proven it on the field and on the court. I'm not going to, bore your listeners with the litany of all the achievements we've had, but you know how significant they've been. Getting close to 40 wins over the P5 in football. Tremendous basketball this year. You saw we almost upset Duke and Kentucky, two of the best teams in the tournament. And I think in the future we're probably going to be a 5 or 6 or 7 bid league. So women's basketball, UConn, another Final Four. Again, this is a league that has really earned it, and that's really what this deal was meant to, I think, reflect that, to validate what we've done or who we are, but also to set us up for continued success. Because the money we're getting, Dan, while significant, is not the money that the P5 gets, but I think we spend it wisely, and I think our guys understand and have learned how to spend it wisely. Yes, there's still some subsidies from the universities that have been important to our athletic programs, but this deal helps you in a lot of ways. It increases your interest, in attendance. I think it'll increase our sponsorship opportunities. I think it'll increase our opportunities to gain units in the tournament, because I think we'll just get better and better in basketball. We'll be able to pay our coaches more, and that'll increase the performance of everyone. I think, we'll knock on the door of the CFP, and we've been on New Year's Day 4 of the 6 years. I think that can continue. So, again, there are a lot of pluses to a deal like this that aren't necessarily reflected in just the deal itself, the numbers themselves.
That coming from the commissioner of the American Athletic Conference, Mike Aresco. Mike, to kind of prove your point here, Kelvin Sampson signs a long-term deal with Houston and decides to stay. And, obviously this has been brought up as another sign. Mike Norvell could have left Memphis a season ago. He decides to sign an extension and stay for football. And now we see Kelvin Sampson at Houston signed on through the 2024-2025 season, and looking at the fact that, he's going to make a good amount of money to be there. He has longevity there, and obviously he's a coach that has had success elsewhere, and Houston has done so many things, as you had alluded to, in the NCAA tournament for men's basketball this season. So just what you can say about that when we're seeing the, maybe less turnover, hopefully less turnover, and extension of coaches, extensions of Mike Norvell, extensions of guys like Kelvin Sampson, just what that says. If you feel like we're getting to that point where, these coaches not only respect the conference, because I believe they do, but they're willing to stay and be at these schools and build it up because they feel like there is something here to prove?
Well, first of all, Dan, I don't think there's any question, what you said is true. I mean, this has enabled us to pay our coaches more, at least knowing what the future holds, having the security of this TV deal in place. And you've seen that. But I also think the higher profile of our schools, the success they've had, the national reputations they've built, are more attractive to coaches than maybe they would have been 5 or 6 years ago or even 3 years ago. But remember, there's a big difference between football and basketball. We will still struggle for a while, into the future to keep our football coaches, because the disparity in salaries among the P5, especially the upper tier of the P5 and where we are pretty significant, as you know. They pay quite a bit more, and there are also some built-in structural things that affect coaches. One is the ability to play for a national championship. We really struggled to get into that top 4. You saw that with UCF. They were very deserving, but didn't quite get there. And I think that probably has an impact on some coaches, although we're making inroads there. And if that tournament, if that CFP, protocol ever goes to 8 and we've got a spot in it, that's going to be a game changer right there. And I think that may well happen down the road. You never know. Point is, we, football, we're making some progress. We're keeping our coaches longer. And also, as we get programs that are really, striving and thriving, like, for instance, Houston's done very well. They had a few off years, and off years were still not terrible years, but you know what Tom Herman did there. Now they've got Dana Holgerson. That's a huge step. Dana Holgerson might not have gone to Houston 4 years ago or 5 years ago, or might not have come to our conference. But now he's not only there, he's happy, and I think he'll stay. I think he'll really like it here. And the same thing with Josh Heupel. I mean, UCF is building a powerhouse down there at Dynamo. They are far more significant than probably 2/3 or 3/4 of the schools in the P5. And so he's got something to really build. And I think, living in in Orlando and having the excitement and the enthusiasm around that program and the ability to recruit in a significant way, he may stay a lot longer than our football coaches typically have stayed. Scott Frost, that was a unique situation with Nebraska calling. And, who knows if Josh Heupel was a quarterback at Oklahoma, if his alma mater called, if there was ever a change there. And not likely, because Lincoln Riley's doing a great job there and is likely to stay. But if that ever happened, I don't know, Josh might have a tough decision. But the point is, he's not just looking to leave. And we've got a number of coaches like that now. We still have some turnover. And in basketball, though, it's different. We're not going to have as much turnover in basketball. We've got incredible pedigree in basketball. Now, the interesting thing, and it's an ironic thing, Dan, this conference built its brand, more on football. And we had to, because, as you know, football drives the media deals. It drives who you are in the universe of college athletics. And we did a remarkable job with a group of schools that maybe weren't as, didn't have the kind of football pedigree that the P5 have, but we did it. Basketball, we had a great first year, won the national championship with UConn and men, but we didn't do as much. We were snake bitten a lot. We lost a lot of tough tournament games we could have won. Didn't have as many teams in the tournament as we should have. We didn't do as well over the last 3 or 4 years, but now that's changed dramatically. And look at the pedigree in basketball. You've got UConn, a blue blood program, Memphis, a blue blood program, Cincinnati, a blue blood program, Houston going back to Phi Slamma Jamma, Wichita State. You've got programs, Temple's got one of the great histories in college basketball. You've got real pedigree here, and now we've got, newcomers that have really made a mark, like UCF, and USF is doing that with Brian Gregory. You look at SMU and what they've done. They slipped a bit, but they'll be back. And I could go on and on with the rest of our teams. Tulsa has great basketball pedigree, going back to Nolan Richardson and Tubby Smith and Bill Self. And Frank Haith has done a good job there. So basketball, we now have some of the best coaches in the country, top to bottom. When you have, again, a Brian Gregory at USF, which had struggled. You now have Ron Hunter over at Tulane, and he'll make his mark. And Again, Joe Dooley now at ECU, he's the last fellow to take ECU to a tournament. You know what he did with Florida Gulf Coast. These were teams that struggled with their RPI. The rest of our teams did generally pretty well. UConn's been down, but not going to be down long with Bob Hurley. And Penny Hardaway is just absolutely doing a phenomenal job recruiting and coaching at Memphis. So Wichita State had a young team. Basketball, Dan, I think we're going to, keep our coaches, and we're paying them a lot. We're paying them, many of them, $3 million. We're right at the top tier in basketball coaching salaries, and that's a little different from football. We pay our coaches in football extremely well, but we don't pay them as much as, obviously, Alabama or Michigan or Ohio State or some of those other schools pay their coaches. But in basketball, we're pretty competitive with almost everybody except maybe a handful at the very, very top tier.
And obviously, a good note there and a lot of success and, like you said, names that are coming through and teams that are stepping up and then teams that have history. I do want to make two quick notes before we wrap up, and one of them is, of the coaches that are coming into the American Athletic Conference for football, Mike Houston coming over to East Carolina, Dana Holgerson, who you had mentioned, coming to Houston, and Rod Carey going to Temple. Just your thoughts on these guys. We know Ken Niumatalolo obviously has the longest standing tenure inside of the American Athletic Conference with Navy. Sonny Dykes is back with SMU. Randy Etzel back with UConn for round number 2. Philip Montgomery in Tulsa. Luke Fickell in Cincinnati, who had a huge turnaround from year 1 to year 2. Mike Norvell, who I mentioned at Memphis. You mentioned Josh Heupel at UCF. Willie Fritz at Tulane. And, of course, Charlie Strong at USF. So for Holgerson, Houston, and Carey, just what you could say about bringing them into the conference.
Well, I think they're really outstanding coaches. And, I mentioned Dana Holgerson, of course, because he came from West Virginia. And Dana's got a great, reputation, great background, had a lot of success. And he, he's got also a lot of charisma. So when he came over, it was a huge news story coming from a P5 school and a good one that was competing for the Big 12 title last year. But Mike Houston is going to be a home run at ECU. ECU has gotten their situation straightened out in many ways. They'll have some renovations to their stadium. They've hired a great basketball coach in Joe Dooley. They're going to have a tremendous football coach in Mike Houston, who's had great success at the FCS level, and those coaches have moved up and done extremely well. And Rod Carey's had great success at Northern Illinois, and I don't think there's any reason why he couldn't have it at Temple. They recruit well. Jeff Collins and Matt Rule left a great foundation there at Temple. But, you mentioned Kenny Niumatalolo, and he and Philip Montgomery, if I'm not mistaken, are the two remaining coaches from, a photo that I have in my office from, I think, our media day back in 2015. But here's the interesting thing about that. Look at the success we've enjoyed since then, even with all the coaching turnover. Obviously, Justin Fuente did a great job building Memphis, but Mike Norvell came in and carried the torch. And look what Scott Frost did, resurrecting the UCF program after George O'Leary had built a wonderful program, had that one terrible year, but that was just a confluence of factors. But George built a real foundation there. And then, Josh Heupel comes in and does incredible things, and, Temple, we lose Matt Rule, but Jeff Collins does a really creditable job. And then, you look at other coaches around the league, we get Luke Fickell at Cincinnati, and Cincinnati's going to be one of our best teams next year. They're loaded, and Luke is a great recruiter, a great coach, great person. And all of a sudden, Mike Norvell takes over, as I mentioned. We've got Sonny Dykes now at SMU, and they clearly played, tougher and clearly improved as the season went on. So, you look up and down the league, Willie Fritz is a great coach. He's coming into his own at Tulane. And again, but Philip and Kenny are two holdovers, and they're both outstanding coaches. But the rest of them have really, done a great job. It's not easy, and we all know this, to take over a program. The continuity is really important, not only in recruiting, but in terms of your system. Kids have to learn a new system. Some kids were attached to the previous coach, and they might want to transfer. There's a lot I mean, what Josh Heupel did coming in and not skipping a beat from Scott Frost and having the burden of all that success on his back and then going undefeated and probably would have won the bowl game had Mackenzie Milton been healthy. That was remarkable. And what Luke did in rebuilding Cincinnati so quickly, I mean, those are just a few examples. Mike Norvell coming in with all that pressure. And again, that is the last thing I'll mention on that, Dan, is that those fellas, along with our basketball coaches and along with Gino Auriemma and the UConn women, which had a huge impact on our league, they essentially built the foundation that allowed us to do the TV deal we did. Because again, a network doesn't give you that kind of increase, doesn't make a game-changing deal unless they feel there's real value. They're not charities. And ESPN, they're wonderful people, but I was there for 13 years, and I was at CBS for 16 years, and this is a business. And they recognized what we had accomplished, and it wasn't a one-horse league. Houston had a great heyday in football, as winning the Peach Bowl and having great years, and Ed Oliver. But then it was UCF. Memphis has had great football teams and had wonderful wins over Ole Miss and UCLA on ABC on brilliant Saturdays. Temple almost beats Notre Dame and had a couple of great years. Tulsa had a 10-win season. Navy had an 11-win season. They've been competitive almost every year. We're down a little bit this year. Cincinnati came back. I could go on and on. And so consequently, it's not just one school. USF developed the rivalry with UCF. That game a few years ago on Friday might have been the best football game of the last decade. If you watch that game, you're out of breath. It was just that kind of great game. So all those things, Dan, contributed to what this league is. And in basketball, we've had teams come up, and we're now at the cusp, and we did it just about the right time. The timing was great because ESPN, I think everybody could see that our basketball's in a really great place. We finally got it together, and that's going to help us. And the UConn women with Gino aren't going anywhere. We have great Olympic sports. That doesn't drive TV as much. We know that, but it generates interest in your conference. And I think in baseball, we're probably going to be in the College World Series at some point when you've got schools like East Carolina and Tulane and Wichita State and Houston and now USF, UCF, and UConn and others that have great baseball pedigree. So again, that's just some of what we're doing, but it all contributed to this deal, and I'm very proud of what these players, student athletes, coaches have accomplished, and they've had administrators who back them every step of the way. If you didn't have committed administrators who really want to be a P6 conference, then frankly, if you don't have a commitment, you don't have anything. You just don't. There's nothing I could do. I could, frame a narrative, but it wouldn't mean anything unless, we were achieving something.
Coming from Mike Aresco, the commissioner of the American Athletic Conference, and you kind of answered my other question when speaking on spring sports and whatnot. So, as this conference pushes forward, obviously, you've known since day zero that, you have my support. I want to see this grow and blossom. Nobody had to rise out of the ashes higher than the American Athletic Conference with realignment and everything that had happened and teams kind of moving all different places. And, I met you at the end of the Big East and the start of the American Athletic before there was even a logo. And I know that your consistent and purposeful effort has paid off dividends. I know that your office as a whole has done that. And I know that these coaches have really pushed that P6 term, and they've pushed the, what they want and how they want it and who they're bringing in. And I think the NFL draft that's going on right now is a sign of that success, is a sign of, these guys that get drafted from these teams inside of the American and have success. Ed Oliver, a top 9 pick this year, and obviously what he's going to be able to do, and he could have gone a lot sooner. So, Mike, as always, I appreciate your time. I respect what you're doing. I thank you for having such a open door policy with me, and I look forward to this conference continuing to break down barriers and truly represent what I think is the theme of America, which is rising out of the ashes and being what we wanted to be. We had that rule. We had those things that didn't make sense. We rose out of it, and I think the American Athletic Conference is asking the same questions. Why can't we be who we want to be? And I think that you're doing a lot of work on fields and courts, and obviously in different rooms and different conversations and in boardrooms to make sure that there is respect for this conference, and I thank you for that.
Well, thank you, Dan. Just a couple of things as we close. I want to thank you for the time you've given me to talk about the conference. Again, you've been a supporter of the conference. You're extremely knowledgeable. Not everybody I talk to, pays as much attention to our conference, knows what we're doing. Also, I must say, you were one of the original people who said this conference has a chance. You were never snarky and never negative, and we endured a lot of that, as you know. And that's understandable based on where we were. And we endured a lot of skepticism, a lot of negativism. People, they refer to us as a mid-major when we really weren't, and we aren't, especially in basketball, not even close. And, we had to just kind of bite our lip and deal with it and move on. But you've always been supportive. The second thing is you've understood where we were going, what we were trying to do. I think your analogy about the American, way and pursuing the American dream, and our name is very appropriate in that regard. America is about upward mobility. This isn't an aristocracy. This isn't something where you're stuck in one place all the time. And that's the point I've made, that the world has changed, and the world always changes. And while football has been the province of the blue bloods for many decades, the world is changing. And suddenly you see teams like UCF developing a national persona that rivals anybody in the P5, and you saw it a little bit with Boise a while back, and you see it with other schools in our conference. In addition, we have, 6 or 7 members that were once in old BCS or the Southwest Conference, P5, essentially P5 conferences, who want to get back. They felt they were relegated and they want to get back. So our name is very appropriate in terms of upward mobility, and that's what we've been trying to do. And I think you recognize that in what you just alluded to, a minute ago. So again, thank you very much for not only the support, but for the interest in the conference and for letting me, talk to you about it. And again, we'll hope to see you, in Newport, at our media day, and maybe before.
No, absolutely, and you also, and we got to shout this out, Mike. You when the weather is nice, the American Athletic Conference has a very, very nice home and always a beautiful view, and I think that I'm fed better there than anywhere else. I don't know, when you have those the lobster opportunities and the big buffets and being right on the water. So, I have to say that too. I mean, it definitely looks the part and is a beautiful, kind of excuse to go somewhere nice and do something good for yourself. So, I mean, it's a lot of great things inside of the conference, but you guys put on so much of, you treat the media well, you respect it, you treat the players and the coaches well, and it really is an experience to look forward to every single year. So, there's really nothing better than that. When I tell people, I'm like, this is what we eat, this is what we do, this is the camaraderie that we have. So, I know that this conference has worked very diligently, and you just so happen to be in a beautiful part of this country as well.
Yeah, the Newport Media Day, Dan, is a unique. It's become almost an iconic event. We get dozens and dozens of writers and reporters who just can't wait to come to that. The lobster dinner, that night is a highlight. We're, knock on wood, we've had great weather for a number of years now, and as you look over Newport Bay, and you've got a big pavilion there. I think one year we almost ran out of lobster, so I had to order another 100 for the following year. So I think we're probably up to over 400 now lobsters. And some of our players, they're pretty big kids. Some of them have been known to eat between 5 and 10 lobsters, and I'm not surprised. But it's a great event. It's beautiful weather. A beautiful place, and we're going to keep it there. I think we have the most unique media day in football, and everybody, it's not an easy place to get to necessarily, especially from our schools because we're geographically diverse, but everybody loves coming, and everybody understands that it's a unique event, and we get a lot of media coverage as a result. So again, we'll look forward to seeing you there.
Absolutely. Well, in the meantime, take care. If I don't see you sooner, like you said, as well. So definitely have a good weekend, and I look forward to talking with you soon, and thank you as always for your time.
You too, Dan. Have a good spring, and we'll look forward to touching base. Thanks for having me.
All right, take care. That coming from Mike Aresco, the commissioner of the American Athletic Conference, once again making that case, talking about the fact that they want to have that respect, but not just be given that respect because they just so happen to be inside of a conference where there's already respect. They want to earn that respect. And and it's funny in the world we live in today. Everybody wants to everybody wants to have it, but not everybody wants to earn it. And I know that, we look at Gino Auriemma and UConn, and is there another team in women's basketball that's more reputable than them? I would say no. And then, and everything that they've been able to put forward, and obviously Brianna Stewart coming from Central New York and CNS. We look at, what Kelvin Sampson is doing in Houston. We look at what Penny Hardaway is doing in recruiting and just really building up Memphis and putting Memphis on a map and putting them on the ticker and getting them out there. And then obviously in football, UCF has had a lot of success, and they have pushed that success to, and nobody does this. Nobody has success under a head coach that takes his entire staff and then has another coach and has success with an entirely new staff. That doesn't happen. I don't care where you go. I don't care what level you're on. You can't go from one to the other and have that amount of success. Look at Syracuse. Syracuse has, every time they've changed coaches, they've gone down to try and build up. And really the only person that built them up was, Doug Marrone a little bit, but the only coach to really build it was Dino, and now we have to see if that can be a sustainable thing for Dino Babers to be able to do it from here. And when I say the only coach to do it, I'm talking about Greg Robinson on. I'm not talking about the success of Coach Mack and Coach P, because Mack and P together obviously gave us our greatest years after Ben Schwartzwalder and everything that he was able to do. So you look at Ben, you look at P, you look at Mack, and then it was nothing. And now, obviously there's the hope that Dino Babers will be able to change ground on that a little bit. But football teams are getting better. They are playing these talented teams. They are putting themselves out there. And Jordan and I have agreed that, if that UCF Florida deal was a real thing, was a tangible thing, UCF should have taken it. But outside of that, Cincinnati, they're taking them. Houston, they're taking them. There's a lot of teams in this conference that they're saying, if you want to play us, let's do it. They're going there. They're coming here. It's just how it is. Cincinnati making that deal with UCLA, I thought was a good opportunity for them to push forward, and seeing Luke Fickell, who came from Ohio State as their D coordinator, go from 4-8 to 11-2, and before that, Cincinnati was doing absolutely nothing for like 3 years. So I give a lot of credit and a lot of respect to the teams that are out there and the work that they put forward and what they've been able to accomplish. And this American Athletic Conference, respect it or not, they're going to demand it. They're going to work hard for it. And I can say that I know the inner workings, that I've been around all these coaches from day one, that, in football, to see all the turnover and all the change. I remember putting my arm around Mike Aresco, the commissioner you just heard from, and I said, listen, you're a redheaded stepchild, I'm a redheaded stepchild, and we're going to help each other out. And I've seen him work diligently to make this something. And obviously with Wake Up Call and Superpowered Pop and Dan on Disney and trivia and everything that I do with Dan Tortora Broadcast Media, I'm working to create something that didn't exist before. And I was the laughable person. Why are you going to the internet? Why'd you leave traditional radio? You're not going to work for ESPN anymore. You're not going to work at Fox. How are you going to get your name out there? How are people going to know to listen? I went through all that. So in a lot of cases, the Americans' fight is my fight. And the American athletics fight and my fight is the fight that America had, of something that never existed. There was a belief, there was a hope, there was a desire to create something that had never been created before for the betterment of all the people involved. That's what Wake Up Call is. That's what Dan Tortora Broadcast Media is. And that's what I like to believe the American Athletic Conference is.